They say the sea keeps its secrets. This place, it drowns in them. Welcome to the Eve's Inn, perched on the jagged Maine coastline. A place where the tide brings in more than just seaweed. My name is Rowan Hart, a detective specializing in the unexplainable. But I found myself investigating disappearances that went deeper than any grave. I was given 3 strange rules just to stay alive. What's the creepiest body of water you've ever been near? Tell me in the comments below. And if you're brave enough to check into the Eve's Inn after dark, subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules and ring that bell, because here, the ocean doesn't just roar, it whispers. The investigation begins. I've learned that the sea keeps its secrets deeper than any grave. Its vast, indifferent darkness swallowing stories whole. And the Eve's Inn, perched on the jagged Maine coastline like a forgotten sentinel, bleached by salt and sorrow, was drowning in them. They hired me, Rowan Hart, an independent investigator who specialized in the kind of unexplainable cases that made city cops sigh and file, underpinning further evidence that will never arrive. To find out why guests at the inn kept vanishing, a string of disappearances stretching back 5 years. Each one a neat, tidy vanishing act, leaving behind only unpaid bills and a lingering chill in the air. This case had the same salt-stenched miasma as the one that had swallowed my partner, Marcus Soule, 3 years prior, up in the misty wilds of coastal Oregon. That particular ghost still walked beside me, his laughter a phantom echo in the roar of the surf. The Eve's Inn itself reeked of generations of damp wood, brine, and a peculiar, unsettling silence that even the crashing waves against the cliff face below couldn't fully penetrate. Its windows, salt-caked and dark, were like vacant eyes staring out at the restless gray Atlantic. Mrs. Marta Driggs, the proprietor, a woman whose grief for her own lost husband and daughter clung to her like the ever-present sea mist, greeted me with the weary resignation of someone who had seen too many hopeful faces arrive and too few depart. She didn't offer pleasantries, just a curt nod and a heavy brass room key, followed by an old, water-stained calling card pulled from a drawer behind the dusty reception desk. My husband, Elias. He wrote these down, she said, her voice raspy, like shells grinding on shingle. Just before he went out for his last walk along the cliffs, her gaze flickered towards a colossal oil painting dominating the far wall of the lobby. A turbulent seascape, dark and brooding. He said they were important. For anyone who stayed longer than a night, the card, its ink faded but still legible, bore 3 archaic rules. Don't look at the ocean painting in the lobby after 1 a.m. Its tides are not of this world. Leave a silver coin on your pillow each night. It wards off the drowned who seek dry warmth. When you look outside and see a ghost ship anchored in the cove, that's your final voyage. Superstition, I thought. Local color. But Marcus had dismissed similar warnings. The last detective on this Eve's Inn case, a sharp kid from Portland named Henderson, had supposedly laughed at the silver coin rule. They'd found his room empty, his pillow undisturbed, save for a single, dark, wet handprint, 5-fingered and chillingly human, slowly fading into the pristine linen. My assigned room, overlooking the churning gray expanse of ocean, was cold despite the sputtering radiator. It smelled of salt, mildew, and faintly, disturbingly, of wet wool, like a fisherman's slicker left too long in a damp. As I unpacked, my gaze kept drifting to that painting in the lobby. It was masterfully done, the waves rendered with a furious, almost violent energy. But there was something profoundly unsettling about the way the light seemed to shift on its varnished surface, the way the painted foam on the crest of a breaker appeared to almost move. I told myself it was a trick of the old, flickering gaslight-style fixtures in the lobby. I hoped I was right. Later, at the reception desk, I met Callan Fry, the night clerk. He was young, perhaps early 20s, thin and pale, with eyes that seemed too old for his face, the color of sea fog. He was meticulously polite, almost unnervingly so, speaking in a low, measured voice as he leafed through a leather-bound volume that looked like an ancient ship's log. He offered no insights, just courteous, empty phrases. My investigation began the next morning, sifting through the meager police reports on the disappearances, a frustrating collection of dead ends and shrugs. Each victim had simply ceased to be. No signs of struggle, no ransom notes, no forwarding addresses, just an empty room and the sighing of the sea. I interviewed Marta Driggs again. She was guarded, her grief a wall, but she confirmed each victim had received an unsolicited, elegantly printed invitation to the Eve's Inn, promising a unique coastal retreat. The source of these invitations remained a mystery. That first night, the inn settled into an unnerving quiet. The wind howled outside, a mournful counterpoint to the rhythmic crash of waves. Well, after 1 a.m., I found myself drawn to the lobby, a reluctant moth to a disquieting flame. I remembered the first rule. I didn't look directly at the seascape painting. Instead, I let my gaze drift around its periphery as I pretended to examine a dusty display case of local shells. But even from the corner of my eye, I could sense it. A thrumming, almost subaudible hum emanated from the canvas. The air around it was palpably colder, and the painted waves, when I risked the briefest, sideways glance, seemed higher, more menacing than they had that afternoon. And with those figures, tiny, indistinct shapes in the painted spume, where before there had been only water, I dismissed it as fatigue. The power of suggestion. My exploration of the inn's creaking hallways led me to Juno Yates, a young woman who did the cleaning. She was a bundle of frayed nerves, her eyes wide and haunted. When I pressed her, gently, about the inn's history, she flinched. They don't like being talked about, she whispered, casting fearful glances down the shadowed corridor. The ones who don't leave. She eventually, reluctantly, showed me a sketchbook filled with childlike crayon drawings of a 3-masted schooner. In each drawing, the ship was slightly different. An extra sail here, a missing cannon port there, sometimes crewed by stick figures with vacant, staring eyes, sometimes entirely deserted. It's the Mercy's echo. She breathed. She comes for them. I saw her once. Just for a moment. Through the fog, her hand trembled as she sketched another version, this time with a dark figurehead that looked disturbingly like a screaming woman. The nights in my room were no less unsettling. The distinct, rhythmic creak of rope against wood, as if from a ship's rigging, seemed to emanate from the walls. The scent of brine and decaying seaweed would intensify without warning, even with the window sill shut against the biting coastal wind. One morning, I found a small damp patch on the wooden floor beside my bed, shaped vaguely like a footprint, though no earthly shoe could have made it. It smelled faintly of the deep, cold ocean. I found Marcus' old police-issue Zippo lighter in my bag, its familiar weight a small comfort. The flame, when I flicked it open, cast dancing, uneasy shadows. I resolved to get some silver coins. The small fishing village of Port Clyde, a few miles down the coast from the Eve's Inn, had a general store that, amongst the fishing lures and tourist trinkets, sold old silver dollars polished to a dull sheen. I bought a handful, the weight of them in my pocket a tangible, if irrational comfort. That night, I placed one on the crisp linen of my pillow, as per the second rule. I don't know if it was the coin or sheer exhaustion, but I slept. Uneasily, but I slept. Until a sudden, violent chill snapped me awake. The room was icy, the air thick with the smell of salt and something else, something rank and fishy. My window, which I was certain I'd latched, was ajar, the tattered lace curtain billowing inwards. And then I saw it. A hand resting on the windowsill. Long, pale fingers webbed with a thin, translucent membrane, glistening with moisture, the nails like chipped, yellowed ivory. It was pushing the window further open. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrambled back, my hand fumbling for the mag light on the nightstand. The hand paused, then slowly, deliberately, began to withdraw. As it did, I heard a soft, wet sigh from outside, a sound of profound guttural disappointment, followed by the faint, receding drip of water on the shingles below my window. I lay there, drenched in a cold sweat, until the first gray light of dawn. The silver dollar was still on my pillow, but it was tarnished now, a dark, ugly stain marring its surface, as if it had absorbed some vile miasma. I tried to get more out of old Captain Heron, or whatever unseen presence resided within the inn's ancient structure. His voice was never direct. Sometimes words would appear, as if written by an invisible finger, in the condensation on a mirror after a shower. The painter waits for the tide. Other times, a low, rumbling chuckle would echo from the empty fireplace when I mentioned the disappearances, followed by the distinct, spectral scent of cheap rum and stale pipe tobacco tarot. Once I found a single tarnished brass button, the kind used on old naval uniforms, resting on my case file for the Eve's Inn. Heron seemed more a trickster than a guide, his motives as murky as the waters he'd supposedly drowned in. He did, however, offer one cryptic clue, scrawled in the dust on a forgotten bookshelf. The Fry line is bound to the Echo. Silver buys time, but only blood pays the true toll. The Fry line. Colin Fry. The name resonated. I'd done some digging into the local archives. The Mersey's Echo, the ship Juno Yates kept drawing, had indeed been captained by an Elias Fry in the late 1700s. He was the sole survivor of its sinking, a feat that had led to whispers of dark pacts made with whatever lurked in the abyssal depths. Colin, with his old books and his air of quiet detachment, was beginning to look less like an indifferent night clerk and more like a man burdened by a very old, very dark legacy. I noticed then when he was reaching for a ledger, the edge of a tattoo peeking from beneath his starched shirt cuff, a crudely rendered, old-fashioned ship's anchor. He quickly pulled his sleeve down when he saw me looking. The Eve's Inn was beginning to feel less like a place and more like a sentient trap. Time itself seemed to warp within its salt-stained walls. I'd glance at my watch, note the time, then look again, minutes later to find hours had passed. Or vice versa. Corridors I'd walked a dozen times would suddenly feel unfamiliar. A door that should have led to the dining room now opening onto a linen closet I'd never seen before. The numbers on the guest room door sometimes seemed to shift, to blur. My own room, number 7, occasionally felt like it was number 11, or 3. The dreams were the worst, vivid, terrifyingly real. I was on the deck of a storm-tossed schooner, the waves crashing over the rails, the wind screaming like a banshee, and Marcus was there, my old partner, his face pale, his eyes wide with a familiar terror, reaching out to me as a colossal, dark wave loomed, about to swallow us whole. I'd wake up gasping, the taste of salt water in my mouth, the phantom scent of wet wool clinging to me. The ocean painting in the lobby became my unwilling obsession. I adhered to the first rule, never looking at it directly after 1 a.m. But even during the day, its changes were becoming more pronounced, more personal. The sky in the painting would shift from stormy gray to an unnerving, sickly green. The waves grew higher, more menacing, and the figures, they were clearer now. Tiny, yes, but undeniably human, clinging to the wreckage of a ship that looked horrifyingly like the Mersey's Echo. One of them, a gaunt figure with wild dark hair, looked disturbingly like Henderson, the detective who'd vanished before me. Another, with a familiar, haunted expression, was Marcus. His painted eyes seemed to follow me. I delved deeper into the history of Captain Elias Fry. He'd returned from the wreck of the Mersey's Echo, a changed man, they said. Rich, yes, from a salvaged cargo no one could quite account for, but also haunted, reclusive. He'd built the Eve's Inn on this desolate stretch of coast, but had rarely taken guests, preferring his own company and the company of the sea. He died screaming, according to local legend, during a storm much like the one that had sunk his ship, raving about the caller from the deep and the debt that must be paid. Colin Fry, when I tried to question him about his ancestor, became even more withdrawn. his polite mask slipping to reveal a flicker of something cold and resentful. "Some histories are best left undisturbed, Detective," he'd said, his voice flat. "The sea doesn't give up its dead, or its bargains." One afternoon, Juno Yates, her face even paler than usual, pressed a small, folded piece of damp cloth into my hand. "I found this, tucked under the pillow in room 7, after Mr. Henderson left," she stammered. I unfolded it. It was a fragment of what looked like a ship's pennant, cheap, modern souvenir fabric, but embroidered on it, in faded gold thread, was a stylized ship's anchor, identical to the tattoo on Callan Fry's wrist. And beneath it, almost invisible, were 3 tiny, meticulously stitched letters. M.E.H. Marcus Elias Henderson. The initials of the lost, woven into the fabric of the inn's curse. The fog rolled in that night with an unnatural, predatory swiftness. A thick, gray shroud, swallowing the eaves in, muffling the roar of the Atlantic to a distant, sorrowful moan. It wasn't just fog. It carried the biting chill of the abyssal depths and the unmistakable, suffocating stench of brine and ancient decay. The air in my room grew heavy, each breath an effort from somewhere outside. Faint and mournful, a sound began to drift through the swirling mist. The slow, rhythmic tolling of a ship's bell. A sound that resonated deep in my bones with a primal dread. Rule number 3. When you look outside and see a ghost ship anchored in the cove, that's your final voyage. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away from the window, to barricade the door, to find some deep, dark corner and pray for morning. But Marcus' face, his eyes wide with that familiar terror from my dreams, swam before my vision. Henderson's neatly written notes devolving into madness. The dark handprint on the linen. The debt I owed them, the one I owed myself, was a stronger pull. I forced myself to the salt-caked window, wiping away the condensation with a trembling hand. I peered out into the swirling, phosphorescent gray, and there she was, anchored in the small, treacherous cove directly below the inn, her skeletal masts piercing the fog like a forgotten god's decaying fingers. Was the Mercy's echo. She wasn't a memory, not a dream. She was terrifyingly, supernaturally real. Her timbers were black with age and rot, festooned with grotesque, undulating swathes of seaweed and barnacles that pulsed with a faint, sickly green luminescence. Her tattered sails, like burial shrouds, billowed softly in a wind I couldn't feel. Eerie, cold lights, like corpse candles, flickered from her empty portholes, and on her foredeck, shrouded in mist but undeniably present, were figures, pale, indistinct, their movements slow and jerky, like puppets on decaying strings. I saw Henderson, his head lolling at an unnatural angle. I saw the other faces from the inn's grim ledger of the lost, and I saw Marcus. He was looking directly at me, his hand outstretched, a silent, sorrowful invitation. His lips moved, forming my name, though no sound reached me through the glass, only the tolling of that damned bell. A wave of profound narcotic weariness washed over me. The urge to open the window, to step out onto the narrow, treacherous cliff path, to join them on that final silent voyage, was almost irresistible. It wasn't fear. It was a strange, seductive longing for an end to struggle, for the cold, quiet embrace of the deep. They're beautiful, aren't they, Detective? In their own way. Callan Fry's voice, quiet and eerily calm, came from the doorway. I hadn't heard him enter. He stood there, no longer the diffident night clerk, but something older, colder. His eyes reflected the ghostly light from the phantom ship, and the small anchor tattoo on his wrist seemed to almost glow. He held a small, tarnished silver bell in one hand, identical to the one whose tolling echoed from the cove. "This is your doing, Fry," I said, my voice a hoarse rasp, tearing my gaze away from the spectral invitation outside. "That ship, the disappearances, the painting." He smiled, a thin, chilling curve of his lips. My doing? No, detective. Mine is merely to facilitate. To honor the ancient covenant, my ancestor, Captain Elias Fry. He made a bargain in the heart of a storm with a power from the deep, Velvach-Tor, the Tidebound, the caller from the abyssal plane. Life in exchange for tribute. He gestured towards the window, towards the Mercy's echo. The painting in the lobby is its window to this world. The ship is its vessel for collection. And I, as the last of the Fry line, am its humble servant, its harbor master, if you will. You've been luring them here, I accused, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. The invitations. You've been feeding this thing. Innocent people. Innocent. Fry's smile widened, but it held no warmth. Only a profound, ancient weariness. The sea makes no such distinctions, detective. It only claims what is due. Velvach-Tor granted Elias passage through the gates of death. In return, it requires passage for others into its domain. 13 souls, for each generation of the Fry bloodline to renew the pact, to keep the Tidebound appeased, and to grant a certain longevity to those who serve faithfully. He looked out at the phantom ship, his expression almost wistful. Imagine, detective, an eternity with the sea. No more pain, no more struggle. Just the cold, endless peace of the deep. My ancestor awaits me there, and soon I will join him once my debt is paid in full. And Marcus, Henderson, they were just installments on your family's demonic mortgage. The rage in my voice was a raw, burning thing. They saw the ship, detective. God, just as you are seeing it now. They understood the invitation. Fry's gaze hardened. I even tried to break the line, you know. Years ago. To end this, a length of rope, a sturdy beam in the attic. He touched his neck absently. Velvach-Tor does not permit such dereliction of beauty. It pulled me back, reminded me of my obligations. The toll must be paid. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. You are number 12, detective, so very close to completing the choir. Then perhaps I too can finally rest. He raised the small silver bell in his hand, preparing to ring it. A sound that I knew with chilling certainty would be the final summons. The figures on the Mercy's echo seemed to lean forward, their empty eyes fixed on me with a hungry anticipation. From the painting in the lobby downstairs, I could almost hear a low, resonant hum, like the abyssal breathing of some colossal, submerged intelligence. Velvach-Tor was stirring, its influence coiling around the inn, around me, tightening its spectral grip. The final voyage was at hand, and the tide was rapidly, inexorably coming in. Colin Fry's confession, a tale of generational damnation and desperate servitude, hung in the frigid, salt-laced air. The tolling of the Mercy's echo's bell grew louder, more insistent, each chime a nail hammered into the coffin of my hope. The figures on deck, Marcus among them, beckoned with a cold, irresistible allure. Velvach-Tor's hunger was a palpable presence, a suffocating weight pressing in from the mist-shrouded cove. Fry raised the small silver bell, his eyes alight with a mixture of grim duty and a terrifying, weary anticipation. It is time, detective. The tide waits for no man. My mind raced. The rules, they weren't just warnings. They were parameters, vulnerabilities. Don't look at the ocean painting. After 1 a.m. Silver coin. Words off the drowned. Ghost ship. Final voyage. But what if the rules could be bent, reflected? Old Captain Heron's cryptic whispers echoed in my memory. The painter waits for the tide. Silver buys time, but only blood pays the true toll. And then another fragment, one I dismissed as rambling, surfaced. Mirrors hold no sway for the deep ones, but an image of an image that confounds the call. An image of an image. The painting. It was Velvach-Tor's window. Fry had said so, but the rules specified looking at it. What if the entity, or its power through the painting, couldn't distinguish a direct gaze from a reflected one, especially when its psychic energies were focused elsewhere? like on the manifested ghost ship. The tide may wait for no man, Fry, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, considering the abyss yawning before me. But sometimes, a man can redirect the current. It was well after 1 a.m. The fog outside was so thick it seemed to press against the window panes. The ghost ship, the Mercy's Echo, was a solid, undeniable presence in the cove, its spectral lights casting an unholy glow. This was the peak of Velvach-Tor's power, the moment of summoning. I backed away from the window, towards the antique, full-length cheval glass mirror that stood in the corner of my room, its silvering tarnished with age. It had been covered with a dust sheet, but I'd pulled it off during my initial search of the room. Fry watched me, a flicker of confusion in his cold eyes. "What are you doing, detective? You cannot escape the summons. No one ever has." "I'm not trying to escape it, Fry," I said, positioning the heavy mirror so it directly faced the window, and by extension, the anchored Mercy's Echo. "I'm offering it a different perspective." Then I turned my back to the window, to the spectral ship and its beckoning crew. Instead, I faced the mirror, and in its dim, wavering reflection, I saw the ghost ship, the mist, the yearning figures on its deck. I was looking at an image of an image, and I stared directly into the reflected heart of the storm-racked sea, within the massive oil painting in the lobby downstairs, now visible in a smaller secondary mirror, angled just so on my dresser. A trick of the inn's strange, shifting geometry that I only just consciously registered. It was a distorted multiple reflection, but undeniably, I was looking at the painting after 1 a.m., while the ghost ship was anchored. I was fulfilling, yet subverting, two rules simultaneously. A low, guttural moan of confusion, of frustration, echoed not from the cove, but from the very walls of the inn. The tolling of the ship's bell faltered, becoming discordant. The air in the room vibrated, the pressure intensifying to an almost unbearable degree. In the reflection, the figures on the Mercy's Echo paused, their beckoning gestures frozen, their empty eyes seeming to flicker with a primal uncertainty. Fry gasped, his hand clutching his chest, his face contorting. "No. What sorcery is this?" The cold. It's twisting the painting in the lobby. I could feel its power, even through the layers of reflection, seemed to fight back, to try and assert its direct claim. But the manifested ship, the primary conduit for the current summons, was now receiving a corrupted signal, a feedback loop of its own reflected power. Velvach-Tor, it seemed, was not accustomed to such paradoxes. The silver bell in Fry's hand began to glow with an intense, sickly green light, the same light that emanated from the ghost ship and the core of the painting. He cried out, dropping the bell as it suddenly became too hot to hold. It clattered to the floor, the tolling ceasing abruptly. And then the screaming started, not from me, but from Colin Fry. He clawed at his own skin, his eyes wide with a terror that dwarfed anything I had yet witnessed. "It's wrong," the reflection. "It's calling. Me, the bloodline, the anchor in the cheval glass." The reflection of the Mercy's Echo began to waver, to distort violently. But it wasn't fading. Instead, the image of Colin Fry, standing beside me in the room, began to shimmer, to become translucent, and the reflection of the ship seemed to surge towards his reflected image, its spectral timbers passing through the reflection of the room, as if the mirror had become a gateway, not for me, but for him. His own damning heritage, his unbreakable bond to the Mercy's Echo, and its original sin, was now his undoing. The tide, redirected, was claiming its own. Colin Fry's screams intensified, becoming a high-pitched, inhuman shriek as his reflection in the cheval glass was violently pulled, stretched, and then seemingly absorbed into the spectral image of the Mercy's Echo. His physical body in the room convulsed, then went limp, slumping to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, his eyes wide, vacant, and clouded with the same milky film I'd seen in the eyes of the drowned. The stench of brine and decay filled the room, overpowering, then just as quickly began to recede. In the mirror, the ghost ship, the Mercy's Echo, with its newly acquired, shimmering passenger began to slowly, majestically fade. The figures on its deck, including the spectral image of Marcus, turned their gaze from me. Their expressions no longer beckoning, but peaceful? Resigned? It was hard to tell. As the ship dissolved into the swirling fog, the tolling of its bell sounded one last time. A faint, melancholic note that seemed to carry a hint of release. Then, silence. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the natural sound of the wind and the distant, rhythmic crash of the real Atlantic waves. The oppressive atmosphere in the room lifted as if a great weight had been removed. The unnatural chill dissipated. I looked at the painting in the lobby via my dresser mirror. It was still a turbulent, brooding seascape. But the inner light, the sense of malevolent sentience, was gone. It was just a painting again, a dark, unsettling work of art, but nothing more. Marta Driggs found me at dawn, sitting by the window, staring out at a calm gray sea. Fry's body lay on the floor. I told her a version of the truth, omitting the more unbelievable reflections. I said Fry had been responsible, that he'd succumbed to some family madness, that his actions had triggered a series of freak occurrences, culminating in his death. She listened, her face unreadable, then nodded slowly. The sea, it always collects its debts, Mr. Hart, one way or another. She looked at Fry's still form. Perhaps Elias can finally rest now. And my Michael and little Sarah. The Eve's Inn was closed shortly thereafter. Marta sold it to a developer who, locals whispered, planned to tear it down and build luxury condos. Though the project kept getting mysteriously delayed. The painting was taken down, crated up, and sent to a distant, obscure museum archive. Labeled simply 19th century seascape. Artist unknown. I returned to Portland, to my quiet, solitary life. The case was officially closed. Fry, a disturbed individual responsible for the earlier disappearances through unknown means, who then took his own life. No mention of ghost ships, ancient sea demons, or cursed paintings. The world preferred its horrors neat and explicable. But the sea, as I learned, has a long memory. About a year later, I was walking along a windswept beach in a different state, hundreds of miles from Maine. The tide was out, revealing a stretch of sand littered with driftwood and shells. My eye caught something half buried in the wet sand. It was a small, tarnished silver bell, identical to the one Colin Fry had held. As I picked it up, a faint, cold mist began to roll in from the ocean, and for a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, I thought I heard the distant, mournful tolling of a ship's bell. I looked out at the horizon, at the endless gray expanse. Velvach-Tor was still out there, in the deep, dark places. Its window to our world might be closed, its harbor master claimed, but the tide always eventually returns, and it always seeks a new shore, new bargains, new echoes in the deep. The ocean's canvas was vast, and there were always more stories waiting to be painted in shades of brine and blood. My own voyage, I suspected, was merely in a temporary, uneasy calm between storms. The Eve's Inn held its secrets close, guarded by tides from another world. Rowan Hart learned that some investigations lead to places that defy explanation. The rules were a desperate guide through a terrifying performance staged by the sea itself. The final voyage was taken, but the ocean remembers. Seriously, if you didn't stay until the very end, you missed the ultimate twist, the final chilling echo that reveals the true, ongoing nature of the Eve's Inn's curse. The last few moments will make you look differently at the waves. What do you think Velvach-Tor truly is? What was Captain Elias Fry's original bargain? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you made it through the night at the Eve's Inn, if the tide hasn't claimed you, then you're already a part of our story. Subscribe to Night Creepypasta Rules, because some debts are paid in souls, and the sea is always hungry.